There's a lessons that need to be taught. You as an educator, how can we go to the next level and keep this going and make sure everyone at least have an opportunity to get what you're teaching?
Well, I think one of the secrets is for people to consider how important history is. It's so easy to think that history is something that's irrelevant, that history is something that belongs to the past. And Toni Morrison says a fascinating thing. She says the past is more infinite than the future. So the future we don't know anything about. It's unknown, it's ahead of us, but the past is infinite. There is so much to learn. And I think that for me, one of the things that is a real treasure of studying history, if we study it not just with our brains, but with the mind that's a combination of the brain and the heart, that's the real mind, is that we learn what it means to be a human being. That's the secret of history. That's the passion. You get born into the species, but to learn what it means to really be a human being. So this evening, what we were looking at in this video was a really broad look at history. From 2009, we look at Africa today and how the media presents Africa so often, and what we hear about is war, what we hear about are human rights abuses, what we hear about is hunger, corruption, and that exists. There are tremendous problems, but that is not all that exists in Africa. There are scholars today. There are people who work harder and in fascinating roles. And they are building on a tradition from the past. Africa, before Europeans came, had thousands of years of human history, thousands of years of civilizations and societies, thousands of years of cultural production. And this evening's documentary was just a moment in African history, a moment before Europeans were aware that Africa even existed. Europeans were so isolated from most of the rest of the planet that they didn't know that the continent of Africa existed below the Saharan Desert. All they knew about was the coastline of Africa. What they were missing in their understanding was the interior of the continent, where kingdoms had existed for centuries that were involved in scholarship, in architecture, in medicine, in judicial proceedings, and all of this founded on trade.
Let me ask you a question. We're going to pose two questions to you. First, where's your book? When you come out with your book? Because we want to make sure we purchase it. We want to make sure our community gets it. Second of all, when people see you, they want to know how it go about that you are teaching African studies. There's so many people who they feel need to be qualified, or they have to be a certain pigmentation, got to be a certain person to teach, African history. Some people feel reluctant. What are some challenges you have as an educator teaching African history?
Well, when I, this is what I've done all of my adult life since I was about 28 years old. I started teaching, today I'm 30, right? Started teaching African American history. And I sometimes tell people that the most frequently asked question I've had in my life is, so what's a white girl like you doing in a place like this? And I actually feel very humbled by the work that I do. I'm not the most qualified. There are not a lot of people who feel more passionate than I do. And that would be a long story, how I got into this. But I will say that if I told you that I taught ancient Chinese history or the history of the French Revolution, you wouldn't bat an eye. You'd say, "Oh yeah, that's what you do." But when I say I teach African or African American history, it's so what you doing there? I don't know how anyone who learns a little bit about African American history or African history can't be completely fascinated by it. And fascinated because it touches on some of the most important pieces of what it means to be a human being. I teach the transatlantic slave trade, and there are days I go home and I pull the covers over my head. It's hard to teach about some of the aspects of our history, but what we learn about resilience and what we learn about the human heart and human strength.
Students who are looking at you now via our television station or YouTube, what are some things you like to say to them?
You pose some tough questions. So I don't think anybody ought to trust me in a minute or two. When I teach in a classroom or when I do workshops with teachers, which is another one of my passions, I like to have about a 10-week minimum because I actually believe that people should ask hard questions. I remember one time I had a student years ago who sat on the front row, and he never said a word to me. He would not look at me for 13 weeks. He sat on the front row, made a good grade in the class, and I ran into him about a year later. And we were talking in a hallway, and I said, so what was happening when you took that class? He said, "Lady," he said, "I was so angry listening to some Southern white woman talk about Africa and African Americans." He said, "I was so angry. I was angry for 13 weeks, and I learned so much."
We hope to see more of you. Once again, let people know where you're teaching at. Let them know where your class at. Let the teachers out there know how to get in contact with you, because we feel you're a very, very important tool to this community.
Thank you so much. My name is Barbara Anderson, and I'm at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill with the African Studies Center. If you go to our website, you can find me there, and I'd be very interested. Our job is to work with the community. Our job is to work with teachers, and there is no one that I love working with more than teachers and young people. It's a pleasure. So I look forward to hearing from folks.